You've been warned. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We will get started here in just a few minutes. I wanted to review a couple of logistical items before we get started with today's presentation. Excuse me. Once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Michelle Cook, and I will be the moderator for today's presentation. Before we get started, here's a few logistical pieces of information for you. First, please be aware that today's webinar session is being captioned and recorded. The link to the live captioning is provided in the training announcements and also in the chat pod, which you can access by choosing the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Please also take note of the Q&A option at the bottom of the webinar screen. The question and answer portion of the webinar will occur at the end of the presentation. You may submit questions to the Q&A area at any time throughout the session. But we will have that dedicated time for Q&A at the end of today's session. A copy of the PowerPoint slides from today's presentation will not be made available electronically. However, the presentation is being recorded and will be archived on the Common Learning portal for later reference. Today's webinar topic is Accessible Digital Media 101 and is being presented by Christy Rugg and Alex Lindeman. Christy is a videographer and visual information specialist at the Historic Preservation Training Center. She also serves as a board member for the Employees for the Advancement of People with Disabilities, ERG, assists in running the Disability Dialogue Series, and is a member of the National Web Council's work group on digital accessibility. Alex is a visual information specialist at Denali and works half-time for the NPS Office of Communications. For several years, he has chaired a work group of the NPS National Web Council focused on digital accessibility and enjoys helping coworkers figure out how to be inclusive and thoughtful in how they communicate in the 21st century. The objectives for today's training are to identify the types of digital media that can be utilized by the NPS in reaching virtual audiences, describe the process of captioning, audio description, and alt text to achieve effective communication, list the types of digital media that should include alt text, list the types of social media that need to be accessible, and define best practices in accessibility for social media. Please remember to submit any questions for the Q&A portion of today's webinar in the Q&A window, which can be selected at the bottom of your screen. It is now my pleasure to turn the presentation over to Christy and Alex.
Great, thank you, Michelle. So as Michelle mentioned, my name's Alex, and with me is Christy. Christy and I talk an awful lot about accessibility in our free time and in our work time and in all of our time. So whenever we talk about digital accessibility, we always prefer to introduce the topic to somebody who's new to it by talking about things like how it feels good to put in work that makes somebody's life better, because you're making sure that regardless of what disability they might have, they can understand the communication, the content that you're trying to present to them. So there's that moral case. We also like to take time and go into the business case. The audience for whom this kind of work matters is I think, surprisingly large to a lot of people. A lot of folks don't realize how many of their fellow Americans have hearing issues or who have sight issues. And so there is a business case to be made for this. There's also this principle called universal design, where work that's done to help an audience because of some sort of accessibility need is also going to be useful to the broader population. So ramps are a really good example. I am a personally very clumsy person. I trip upstairs, I trip downstairs. If I see a ramp, I'm going to take a ramp because it's a lot harder to trip on a ramp. But ramps aren't made for clumsy people. Ramps are made for people in wheelchairs and who have mobility issues so they can get in and out of buildings or up and down grades. So there's that business case as well for doing a variety of work, a variety of efforts related to this overarching topic of accessibility. But we have a pretty tight timeline. Just last month, Christy and I spent an hour talking about just one facet of what we're going to talk about today. So time is tight, and we want to make sure there's room for questions for people who might have them, who are new to this topic. So we figured we would start with the starkest argument in favor of why you should care about accessibility, digital accessibility. And that is because it is the law. We work for the federal government. We all work for the executive branch. I'm pretty sure this is all Park Service employees. There could be people here who are not with the Park Service. I'm not sure. But at any rate, the majority of us work for the executive branch, and the executive branch's entire purpose is to uphold and execute the laws of this country. So the laws that are particularly applicable here, or really I should say the law that is particularly applicable here, has two key sections that matter for what we're going to talk about today. So Christy, why don't you talk a little bit about this first one, section 504.
Awesome, thanks. And Alex, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I should have asked, can you hear me?
Fantastic. Yeah, I could. I would have said something if I couldn't hear you.
I figured.
Thank you. So we're going to start with section 504, and section 504 is part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And it states that people with disabilities cannot be excluded from participation in or be denied the benefits of or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity conducted by any executive agencies. Basically, you cannot discriminate against people with disabilities, or you cannot provide a means to let them participate in your programs. And when we talk about providing access for people with disabilities, what we mean is access that is access to information and services in a manner that is equitable, which is different than equal, but equitable to access provided to people without disabilities. And we're going to talk a little bit about this equitable idea a little bit later on as well. Alex, do you want to talk about the next one?
Yeah, so section 508 of the same law, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And we should mention that law has been amended by Congress several times in the 90s and most recently in the mid-2010s, the 2016 refresh of the section 508 rules and policies. So it's not just worrying about the technology of 1973. It's been updated to account for our modern day technology. So section 508 of that law, or just 508 for short, basically states that anything we do in the digital realm needs to be accessible for all people, regardless of ability. And so this encompasses complex content like videos, live streams, audio recordings, podcasts, but it also applies to digital documents. So your Word documents, your PDFs, your Excel spreadsheets, anything that you're publishing in its final form needs to be accessible to all people, regardless of ability. So everything that we do on our own website on nps.gov, everything we do on social media websites like Facebook or YouTube or Twitter's, all those things, section 508 applies. So the actual medium where you're delivering your content doesn't matter. So you could be producing something for a TV program if that still happens where you are. It could be work for a website, a social media site. It could be something you're sending to someone via email. It could be a digital exhibit inside of a visitor center. If it's made of bits and bytes, section 508 probably applies to it. And the fact that you work for the federal government means that it needs to be accessible. And in fact, even if you're just consulting, if you're spending work time involved in some sort of digital communication effort, whether it's producing a document, producing a film, or whatever, Section 508 is going to apply as soon as you start putting your time into it, even if you're not the videographer. So even if you're just contracting for something to happen, Section 508 still applies, and your digital content must be accessible. So the bulk of what Christy and I are going to talk about today is introducing different types of digital content and what it means for those things to be accessible. So up first is sort of the simplest and probably the most prevalent type of digital content that you're going to work with, because you can put images into documents, you can upload them to web pages, you can post them on social media sites. So I suspect all of you have worked extensively with images at some point in time. And in order to ensure that your images are accessible, you must write something called alternative text, or alt text for short. So if somebody is blind and they use a screen reader to interact with the internet, that screen reader needs to be able to identify what's in an image so that it can describe it to the person who is blind. So alt text is how you do that. It also has a sort of side benefit. When you write alt text for your images, that is not only used by screen readers and by people who are blind or who have low vision, but it's also used by things like search engines and digital assistants. So by writing good alt text, you make your images more likely to be found by things like the Google image search or by Alexa. If somebody says, hey, okay, Google, show me an image of a snowshoe hare. It's not like, okay, Google, that digital assistant magically knows what a snowshoe hare is. At least in this current age, it is looking for alternative text and images to help identify, Christy has a cat in her face, to help identify what a given image is, so it knows if it should bubble that up and offer it as a search result. So this is another example of that universal design concept where taking a little bit of time to write high quality alternative text not only helps people who are blind, but it helps anybody looking for an image that happens to be the kind of thing that you've now put out on the interwebs. So the precise way to write alternative text is going to vary from platform to platform. So when you are using an image in like a digital document, like a Word document, usually you can right click on your image and one of the options you're going to find is either properties, or it might even just specifically say edit alternative text, and you're going to be able to then write out your alternative text description of that image. Other tools like the NPS.gov content management system, when the moment you upload an image, it asks you to go ahead and write alternative text for it. Some social media sites are going to make it a little harder to find, which is unfortunate, but I believe most of them or all of them, I don't use the socials very much, Christy's going to be our expert for that, should provide a way for you to write your alternative text for your image. Now, there is a lot of technology out there that tries to write it for you. I noticed this just the other day in Word. I guess I don't use Word all that much. I usually make stuff in InDesign. Microsoft Word will try to just write alternative text for you, and that's great, but you still need to go in and review it and decide if it's actually good alternative text or if it needs to be modified. So don't ever just rely on the machine world to create your alternative text. Probably someday we'll get to a point where that can just happen, although at that point, there's some dystopian sort of scenarios that always go through my mind when I think about the internet knowing better than me how to describe an image. Anyway, don't rely expressly on machines. So I know Facebook tries to auto describe images, and Word, Microsoft, SharePoint tries to auto describe images when you upload them to a SharePoint site. When you're going to like put them into a page. So always look for the option to edit alternative text and either write your own or modify what the machines have provided for you. So, okay, that's the way that you go about trying to find where to input this alternative text. What are some best practices? What should you actually say? And at its core, alternative text or alt text is really simple. You're just describing what this image shows in a very literal fashion. There might be a little bit of nuance to this. So for example, I had this image on a previous slide and I'm using it again here because in my opinion, this rabbit looks really derpy and kind of funny, but this is a snowshoe hare. And so maybe my alternative text, if I was going to write that for this image, might be a snowshoe hare eating grass and making an open mouthed expression. But you need to think about jargon and unfamiliar terms. And so thinking about snowshoe hares, I live in Alaska, snowshoe hares are everywhere, we're very used to them, but not everybody knows what a snowshoe hare is, and the word hare could be confusing. So maybe better alternative text would be something like a brown colored snowshoe hare, which is like a large rabbit with its mouth open in a chewing motion. There are other ways. You might be sitting there thinking, well, I would write it this way. There's no one correct way to write alternative text, so don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Don't get hung up trying to think of the exact perfect best way to describe an image, or you're going to find yourself never doing anything else. The more that you do this, I feel like it does become second nature. You'll get to a point where I can't look at an image without thinking of how I would describe it for somebody, which is a little bit annoying because it takes away from enjoying an image, but it just becomes second nature. And it should just take a few seconds every time you use an image in a document or on social media or whatever. Writing alternative text, generally speaking, shouldn't take too long. You're just literally describing what it shows, and you're trying to avoid any specialized terms. You also do not want to include anything that's not shown there. So the copyright for this photo. This photo was taken by a Park Service SCA named Emily Mesner, who takes great photos, but the alternative text is not where I should convey that. I want to convey that in the credit field or just in the body of the post or whatever, if I don't have a credit field for this image. Also, you want to avoid injecting any assumptions. So like I said, this is, in my opinion, this snowshoe hare looks really derpy. I think he looks goofy, or she, I don't know what gender it is, because his mouth is hanging open, but I shouldn't say it's surprised. I don't know if it's surprised. I actually don't think it was. I really think it was chewing on gravel or something weird like that. But anyway, don't try to inject extra information that's not actually being shown by the image. And for another example, just to mix it up and use one that's a little more complex, Christy provided me with this good image of 3 people working in some sort of shop. And so good alt text for this might be what you see on the screen here. 3 workers wearing hard hats, ear protection, and tool belts use a circular saw to cut a board. That's pretty literal. That's pretty good. You do not want to inject other information that is not very fair. So poor alt text might be 3 men working, 1 guy's focused, and the other 2 are bored and thinking about lunch. There is all kinds of stuff wrong in that poor alternative text example. First of all, in most of your photos, this isn't going to be universally true, but in most of your photos, a person's appearance and your assumptions about their gender is probably going to be irrelevant to the photo. Who cares who these people are? You know, I'm sure they're all wonderful human beings, but they're working in a shop. I'm using this photo for some particular reason to illustrate some sort of point or just to liven up a slide in a PowerPoint, who knows? You might occasionally have a reason where you want to really get into identifying a person's appearance and describing them in more detail. So for example, maybe you work at a historic site and you're going to use some photos of a president. Maybe you've got a photo of Barack Obama from 2006 and from 2016, and you're trying to juxtapose how he looks in those 2 photos. That, you know, it makes a lot of sense to really go into a lot of detail describing, you know, the face and the appearance, the overall look and demeanor of that person. But in your average photo where maybe you've got hikers in a park enjoying an activity, or you've got people having a picnic or something, you don't really need to get in tremendous detail about what they look like. So just literally describe the image. So 3 workers, they've got hard hats, they've got ear pro, tool belts, they're working with power tools. That's great. And then don't jump to conclusions based on expressions or behavior, or you might even know, maybe you took this photo and you're like, yeah, Bob in the back, seriously, he did not want to work that day. He was hungover. You can't tell from the photo. You don't need to put that in just because you know that it's true. So avoid adding your extra context, whether it's an assumption you're making or whether it's secret knowledge you actually have. Just describe the photo. You don't need to get any extra details that aren't conveyed visually. You're just taking visual information and turning it into some words. That's all you're trying to do. So alternative text is really easy at its core. There are edge cases where you get into complex stuff like maps, or if there are words, like maybe there's a sign here. You want to describe what the sign says if the words are important. So it is a little more complex than just what I've talked about. But in the interest of time, that is the very basic beginner primer to what alternative text is. So let me bump over to the next type of content, and Christy's going to take this one away.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. I'm going to check my audio again because my headphones died in the middle of you talking. Okay, thanks.
Likely story.
I just thought I went completely deaf. Like, I already have a really bad hearing loss. I just thought the rest of it went all at once. It was great. It was very confusing.
I have destroyed your hearing. I apologize.
the next thing we're going to talk about are media that's audio only. So a really good example of this is something like a podcast or an interview, which you don't have video, you just have the audio. And this is actually really easy to make accessible for something like a podcast, something that's audio only. All you need to do is create a transcript. And the reason why we do that is it doesn't matter so much the timing of what's happening in it. We're not trying to match up timing with a visual image. We're just looking at what the audio is. So you just need to create a transcript. And the reason we do that is so someone who's deaf, like me, can understand what people are saying in the audio version. It should also include like any little notes that say like music is playing or like scary music is playing, so that I have a context for what's happening at that time. And the transcript also allows for search engines to be able to understand the contents of the file, which then makes it more accessible to everyone. Makes it more, as we've been talking about, the universal design of something, so that everybody has better access to find that podcast. So for creating the transcript, I find it's very easy. So I run the Friday series, which is the image that's on the screen right now. I don't do the interviews. I sing the theme song at the beginning of the podcast, which most people don't know, which I wrote just as a joke, and then they liked it. And then I do all the sound editing for it. So I cut the interviews down, take out all the all that kind of wonderful stuff. Like that I would have taken out. So when I need to make the podcast for it, as someone who has a hearing loss, it would be very difficult for me to sit there and try and type out every word someone says, and it would be time consuming. So I actually, little pro tip, export it also as a video file, upload it to YouTube as a hidden video or a private video, let YouTube do its first round of auto captions. I steal those auto captions, steal the transcript from it, and then I edit it to actually be what was said, add the right punctuation, identify the speaker, fix it up in that way. But it saves me a lot of time, and it's very easy to do. So that's audio only media, pretty simple. Do you want to head to the next slide? Thank you, Alex. So we're going to be talking next about captioning that's just a little bit more difficult, and that's when it's synchronized media. In this case, we're talking about video. And video could be the moving images plus the sounds. That's what we get for synchronized media. But it could be pre-recorded or it could be live. You need captions for both. It doesn't matter if you've recorded ahead of time, you can put the captions in, or if you're presenting live in video format, think Facebook Live or something like that, you still need captions. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Next slide. Awesome. So there are two types of captions, two commonly used types of captions, open captions and closed captions. And honestly, people get those names confused all the time. So what you're looking at there is open captions are the ones that are burned in on the screen. They are never turned off. You cannot turn them off. So think in open captions, one way to think about it if you're not using captioning because you have a hearing loss would be like subtitles on a foreign film, right? Those are burned into the screen when you're trying to watch it in English subtitles. You cannot turn them off, and if you're on a DVD, but you know what I mean. Like they are on all the time. Closed captions are ones that you can turn on and off. So that would be like on a YouTube video when someone uploads a separate file for the captions. If I need the file, if I need the captions on because I don't know what you're saying, I can turn them on. But to someone who doesn't need them, they're not automatically on. Open captions, since they're always on, they're harder to edit because you have to actually edit the original footage. You have to take the captions off, edit the captions, put them back on. Closed captions, that's just a separate file. So it's easier to fix errors in it if you missed punctuation or you misidentified the speaker. Much simpler to fix them afterwards. So with the open captions, because you're the one putting them on the screen, you can design them however you want. You can pick the font, you can pick the size, you can pick how much of the black blur background there is or what the contrast is. You can also pick where they show up on screen, which for me is a personal pet peeve. When you have a video and you have it have closed captions and you've put a banner at the bottom to identify the speaker and the closed captions show up on top of that banner, so now I can't see the name of the speaker because the closed captions cover it up, that's really frustrating. So if you are designing open captions, you can always move that section of captioning to the top of the screen, not blocking the person's face, so that you get both bits of information as you're watching the video. Yep, and then the closed captions, they're simple. They are great for a lot of people to use. They can, they work on no matter what platform you're using. So YouTube, Facebook, if you're on nps.gov, Instagram's a little different. We'll talk about that. But you can use those basically on any platform. So that's a benefit, and you can use the same file. They have a lot of different file types. There's like .srt, .sbv, .vvt, VTT. I don't even know what VVT is, but I'm sure it's another file size or style. But those are transferable from site to site. So if you were to, let's say, upload your video to YouTube, you let it auto caption for you, and then you fix them. You always have to fix the auto captions. That is not like, please fix the auto captions. We'll talk about why in a minute. You can then download the SRT file, and then you can take that same video and upload it to nps.gov with that same SRT file. So I've created it once, and I've used it in a lot of locations, which makes it super easy. So regardless of whether you're doing open captions or closed captions, you have to keep in mind that these are different than subtitles. Captions are captions for the deaf and hard of hearing, is what you may see like on a DVD if you're looking for captions, or captions, SDH is sometimes how it's abbreviated, subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing. They should account for all sounds in the video. So if I'm watching a scene and there is scary music playing, the dialogue will be very different depending on the audio in the background, right? So I need to keep that in mind. Like imagine watching Harry Potter, but instead of the score that it is, it's like the score from, I don't know, the Muppets movie or something, right? Like very, very different emotion. So you need to actually say that. And that's as easy as it has to be, right? Scary music. Or if it's a song where it's like someone singing, you could actually identify the song, and then I could go look up the lyrics later if I really, really wanted to, which I probably wouldn't do, but I could. Captioning for pre-recorded material is pretty easy. I've mentioned the process if you want to do it in-house, but you can also contract that out. It's about $1 to $2 per minute. Captioning for live material is much more difficult. It's not impossible. It is required, so you should think consciously about whether or not your material needs to be live before you decide to make it live. But it's not unusual for that to see prices around like $180 per hour, and you can get like 15-minute prorated times or 30-minute prorated times. But yeah, captions are required, so please do it. And this is what we talk about when we mean equitable access. If you upload a video and you tell me in the future I will put captions on it, that's not helpful. That means that I don't get equal or equitable access to that video. I don't have the same information, especially if it's safety information or it's like stuff that's important to my job. If you're telling me I have to wait even longer to get that same information when I'm trying to plan my trip to come to your park, that's discrimination, and it is a really big deal. So please don't do that. Please just provide captioning and build that into your system as you're working on your videos. I'm going to go to the next slide, Alex. I'm going to skim over this one a little bit because we've talked about it already. Subtitles for language translations, those are slightly different than subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, or captions for the deaf and hard of hearing. When we're talking about that, you don't always have to caption the sounds that are being made, because that's someone listening to it who still has hearing and they're just needed in a different language. And then the second part that I really wanted to hit was the Caption Board. And this is a different delivery form of captioning. The image on the left is from, Alex, can you remind me where that one's from?
It was in the presentation we got from Ray initially. I'm sure that it's like, is that Katharine Hepburn? I don't know what film that is.
Oh yeah, Ray tells this story. Ray Boomer tells the story about the first time he went to a theater that they had like a caption device and they had good audio description, and how blown away he was by that because he had never seen it before. But essentially, this is up on the left, not the far left image, the center left image. There's a caption board kind of up by the stage, and that's actually captioning what is being said on stage. It's a way to allow access for people who need captions at a live performance. And on the right is actually an image from a movie theater. There are devices that you can turn in your driver's license and you can rent them out type concept. You don't pay for them. In movie theaters, that sits in the cup holder and it has a flexible arm and a screen in front of the person who is deaf, and the screen showing the words, which you can kind of see there with like white text, is set back about an inch into the device. So unless you're sitting directly on looking at it, you won't see it. So it doesn't disturb the people around you. It's not like a glow of light that's distracting. And then you can line it up with the bottom of the screen to have captions in movie theaters when they don't have closed captioning or they don't have captions turned on. Helpful. Don't love the devices because they tend to like fall over. The arms aren't very strong. So I don't personally love using them. Otherwise, I'm just holding them there for the whole video, which is, you know, tiresome. I'd rather watch it at home, have headphones on, blast it, and be able to turn the captions on when I need them. So yeah, those are different types of captioning. And I think we can go to our example, which I'll cover very briefly. Example of a good and example of a bad caption. So for a good caption, this image on the left is from the TV show Arrested Development. It shows captioning in square brackets, which is the set. That's usually how we indicate a sound is being produced, not a word. And the square brackets say hysterical laughing, and then the one below it with a dash in front of it, which indicates a different speaker than the hysterical laughing, says forced laughing. This sometimes shows up as a bad example, but I actually think it's a good example. I haven't seen this scene in which this happens, but if you think about it, the sound of someone hysterically laughing and the sound of someone forced laughing are very, very different, and they have a different connotation, right, to those two different sounds. So it's important to note the difference, right? Someone laughing is very different than someone forced laughing because they don't actually think you're funny, which is what Alex does to some of my jokes, and I appreciate it because at least he's trying to laugh. It's all good.
Lies.
The second one is a poor example. So this is two guys singing in Christmas attire, and the captions read off the Rent Those Reindeer. Now, I'm guessing just from how I pronounce it and from their attire, you can guess that was probably supposed to be Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, but that's not what it says. And if I can't hear it and I'm just reading those captions, it's going to throw me completely out of the video, right? It's going to take me out of the experience. I'm going to have to stop the video, rewind, go get my wife to come over and tell me what they said, which often is what happens, or I have to sit there and try and figure it out. And when it's, especially when it's a Park Service video and you're putting content in there that is location specific or is a proper name of some sort, it is not going to caption it well, which means the person you're trying to communicate with will not have the information they're supposed to have. I've also found with auto captions, sometimes they caption the exact opposite of what what someone's trying to say. So if the speaker says, "Do not attempt a desert hike after 10 a.m. in the summer," the captions sometimes read, "Do attempt a desert hike after 10 a.m. in the summer," because it's missed a word, right? It's not perfect. It's a computer program, not a human.
The machines are trying to kill us already.
Which, like, please don't go attempt a desert hike. Like, personal PSA, preventive search and rescue. Please don't go out there and try to attempt a hike. Just appreciate that. But yeah, that's stuff where, like, as someone listening, if you're listening, you have your hearing, and you don't require the captions as your only form of getting that information, getting what's being said, then yeah, you're like, oh yeah, that's wrong, but that's okay, not a big deal. But as someone like me, or someone who has a bigger hearing loss than I do, you're watching that, and if you don't have another way of checking that information, you will assume what's said is correct. And then you have absolutely the wrong information, and you've gone out on a hike and, ran out of water, because don't hike in the summer after 10 a.m. So yeah, we consider bad captioning anytime the words on screen are not true to the words being said. So captioning ums actually can be helpful, especially if you're seeing the person talk. I read lips. So if I know that the lips move, but there's no word to match up with that, then I don't know if I missed something. So sometimes captioning ums is important. Use discretion there. And if the timing is off. My worst experiences with captions are when the captioning is a sentence after when the words were actually spoken. And it's really, really disturbing. It takes you completely out of the experience. Or if they ruined the punchline, this kills me in movies. Sometimes they identify the speaker before it's been revealed to the audience. And sometimes that's part of the mystery, is like, who is this person? What are they doing? And then they tell you who it is. And I was like, well, now I know that that kid was dead the whole time, and you totally ruined the movie. So thank you for that. So yeah, important, don't disclose things in captioning that haven't been disclosed to the audience. And I think that's the end of my spiel on captioning.
All right. Well, then the other piece of your synchronized media accessibility concerns is describing it. So much like alternative text is a description of an image, audio description is a description of all the different visual content, visual information being shown in a video. And I think at least one of our questions, Ranger Emily asked for any tips for audio describing video with constant narration and loads of short clips changing quickly. We will see if I can answer that on this slide. But to introduce the concept, for anybody who's unfamiliar with audio description or the very basics of what this means, it is a secondary audio track where a narrator is literally describing the visual information being conveyed in the video. And it's going to be used again by people who are either blind or have low vision. I have read some research that suggests it's also useful for people who have cognitive disabilities because the narrator can help explain what's being shown, maybe for somebody who, you know, is so far outside their experience to understand what this is. To use my example on the left, what all these dogs are doing running in front of this human, which is a sled being pulled by a bunch of sled dogs. So in terms of how you create it and how you deploy audio description, so again, it's a secondary audio track, and in an ideal world, there is enough sort of natural pause in your video that you can work your audio description into those pauses so that somebody who's listening to the whole package hears the standard audio track of the video, and at different pauses, they get a description of what is going on visually speaking in that video. And unlike Christy's example, where someone who wants captions to be synced exactly perfect with the things that they're seeing on the screen, if you can't see what's being shown visually, it's not the end of the world if you have to fudge where your descriptions go a little bit. So if you need to front load some of your descriptions for some of your visuals to make it fit within the natural flow of your audio, I think you'll find that that's a perfectly acceptable thing. So even if you're describing the next 2 or 3 scenes in a natural pause, and then the actual sort of primary audio is going on from there, I think that's perfectly fine. But in Ranger Emily's example, where it's just like a sequence of changing shots, and they're all very different, and they're all conveying important visual information. You chose them, you're an artiste, and you chose them for a very specific videographic reason. You're gonna have to edit a whole different version of the video where you pause it and you provide yourself those pauses that did not naturally occur. So when you're making videos, if you're out there and you're gonna make short videos for social media, or you're gonna make a 15-minute video to put in a visitor center or whatever, as you storyboard it, because even if you're just doing a little 30-second video, you should just take a piece of paper, storyboard what you're doing, think about what you're doing. We are not 13-year-olds on TikTok just doing goofy stuff to get views. We should do something professional when we start to think about setting out to do this work. And I'm sure that many of you are doing it that way. But as you storyboard your videos, think about, okay, can I work some natural pauses in here so that when I go back to record a narrative track describing the visuals, that I've got some natural pauses to put that into? If the answer is no, you could also think about, well, can my primary audio track be descriptive enough right from the beginning to describe the visuals? So this doesn't really work for Ranger Emily's example, but imagine that you're trying to share a video of an elk bugling, and you have a ranger doing a voiceover where they're kind of talking about a little bit about the natural history of elk, and then they pause and let the elk bugle, and then they talk a little bit about it. You know, the ranger can set the scene, the narrator can set the scene, and maybe say, you know, describe what the elk looks like, describe what that means. In the process of just describing what it looks like, you can also talk about, you know, oh, from the size of the antlers, you can judge that this is roughly its age. Because it's a snowy forest, you know that it's sort of late in the fall, early in the winter. So you might be able, with a little bit of forethought, to work your description right into the primary audio track, and that's great. but that doesn't always happen. So in Ranger Emily's example, they probably will need to just cut 2 versions of the video. And that's okay for nps.gov. So the actual way that you deliver your videos is going to vary in terms of how you provide your audience audio description. So nps.gov, actually, we have got a really advanced video player. We are probably one of the only websites in the world that offers this audio description feature. So my left-hand screenshot here, which is of a video player on nps.gov, I've circled the AD button, the audio description button that's on there. And when someone who is blind encounters this video with their screen reader, the screen reader is immediately alerted, hey, there's an audio described version of this video, so that they know they can click straight into that. So don't worry about the positioning of the AD button on the player. It's early on in the sequence that a screen reader would encounter that. So for nps.gov, those of you who work or are going to work on nps.gov, you're able to upload 2 versions of your video to one player, and then the end user can toggle between those, which is really great. Excuse me. Most other sites and services do not provide that. So Facebook and YouTube are 2 big places that people use video, or Instagram. I don't have an Instagram. I assume you can put video on Instagram. Those services do not allow you to upload 2 audio tracks to a video, or they don't allow you to upload 2 versions to the same player. So your choices are either make sure that you publish it on nps.gov first with the audio described track, and then just link back to it from the social medias, or upload 2 versions of it, which I know is never anybody's favorite way to do it, but you could publish it as an audio described version on Facebook in sort of what we've done on occasion in Denali is had a playlist. They probably have a different word on Facebook, like a library or whatever, of just our audio described videos. And we upload one there, and then we upload the non-audio described version and make that one the big splashy, here's the cool thing, but also link over to the audio described library of Facebook. So somebody can stay in that Facebook environment that for whatever reason they have chosen to embrace. I don't like Facebook. And they can go see the audio described version. The same is true for YouTube. You can upload 2 versions and just really publicize your standard one, but make sure the description of the standard one links to the audio described one, or better yet, upload it to nps.gov. All of our content should be uploaded there anyway, and just link over to there for people to check out the audio described version. That is, in a nutshell, how you can do that, how you can deploy your audio description. Now, the actual act of creating it, it involves having a good microphone and being prepared to record yourself. And then, like Christy was saying, doing some video editing. Probably you're going to cut out your ums and ahs for your audio description track, because you just need to present concise information about what's being shown visually. It's a blend of art and science. It's something that the first time you do it is going to be time consuming and challenging. You're going to question yourself, did I really convey all the proper information? So if you make 1 video a year, you might just contract it out. That might just be your easier option. And I can't remember, I want to say that we got, so the video I'm showing on the left is called The True Heart of Winter. And our park contracted out the audio description. And I think for this 21-minute long video, I think we paid $300 to have it audio described. So, 21 minutes, $300. It's, it's a lot of money, but it's not the end of the world. If you're just making a little 30-second video and you're going to do it a bunch, you should get in the habit of figuring out how to do audio description. And on the digital community site, which I hope all of you know about, but if you don't, there's this great internal website. Well, I say great because I help work on it. Your mileage may vary. We have a page that's all about creating accessible videos. So audio description is beyond a 101. So really what I want to do here is just introduce you to the topic in case you're unfamiliar, and you're going to have to go and learn more and practice it if you want to get good at it. But all of our video needs to be audio described if it is pre-recorded, synchronized media. That's the fancy term. Pre-recorded synchronized media needs audio description. And then the next piece, since I talked so much about social media, which I know so little about, I will turn it over to Christy.
Yeah, and Alex, I wanted to just answer one question that was in the chat that's related to audio description really quick. And it's when you upload a file to the player on nps.gov, you upload an audio file for the audio description, or are you uploading a separate video file? And you're actually, Alex, do you want to take that one? Dealer's
choice. You may do either one. So if you had to cut a whole new version of the video where the timing's just all different from the standard version, that's fine. It's still all in the same player. If you're watching closely, you'll see that the timestamp will jump around a little bit, but that's not the end of the world. But if you're able to get that audio description track into the same time frame, you can just upload an MP3. So you can upload a video file or an audio file because we have got a super fancy video player.
Super fancy. I like it. So yeah, let's go on to social media. For social media, you know, we are using social media to reach out to new audiences as a way to connect with people. A lot of interactions on social media do not happen on nps.gov. It's a different platform. Right now, the most common channels and the ones that are approved are Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, and YouTube. But as Alex said, if you're uploading anything to YouTube, you should be also uploading it to nps.gov. I think the only time that we would say that's not required is if it's internal and you're trying to upload it to the CLT. nps.gov is public facing. Common Learning Portal is mostly not public facing, so there'd be some difference there. And there's different degrees of accessibility, supportive accessibility, and how you actually do it on the different platforms. So it's a lot of fun. It changes. Like, I think right after Alex and I gave a whole 1-hour session on writing alt text, and we had this whole thing about how to do it on social media, and went through each one of the top 3 platforms with Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter of how you actually upload alt text. And then the next day when I signed in, Alex, I don't know if I told you this, I signed in Instagram and they changed it slightly. And I was like, well, we just gave this class. Of course, but it's in a similar location, so you'll figure it out. It's okay. But yes, you must ensure that content is accessible, and it should be accessible when you post it, not after the fact. If you have content up that is not currently accessible, yes, please go back and make that accessible now. But from now on, you have been told, do it. My stern face. It's not very stern, actually. It's okay.
It's not.
Fine. So for social media, if you want to go to the next slide. Oh, look at that cute little. What do we have here? Some big mountain lion? No, bobcat. What do we got? I can't read it. It's too small. Mountain lion. I see it now. So best practices for social media for the post body, like where you're actually putting the content of the post. It's not enough just to write something. It needs to actually, the language in it needs to be accessible. And for that, what we're talking about is plain language. Don't put in abbreviations. If you're writing a post for, I'm going to say Joshua Tree because I was there. They're really good. I'm not calling them out and saying that they're bad. They're very good. But don't write Joder, right? No one outside the Park Service knows what that is. People inside the Park Service don't know what that is. So actually call it by its proper name. For me at the Historic Preservation Training Center, you better believe I wish I could put HBTC because it's a really, really long name, but I do write it out every single time. So don't use jargon, don't use internal terms, acronyms. We write posts because we're writing posts for the general public. We don't always know exactly who our audience members are on social media. We have a good idea. We can look at some of the insights, but they come from a variety of backgrounds, from different education levels, from different languages, from disabilities, from different cultures, which is a big thing. You want to be writing at an 8th grade level, something that's very easy to understand, not super scientific, not super park nerdy. It can be a little park nerdy, but if you do write like the proper name, scientific name of a plant, you should include the common name so that someone can make an association and understand kind of where you're going with that. So you want to also be, so that's for your the post body, what you're writing as the text. Next, we're going to talk about the post media, and that can come in basically 2 forms, right? We can add images or we can add videos. For images, as Alex said, all images need to have alt text in them. And because we gave an hour-long presentation about this, Alex, are you able to drop that link in, or do you want me to grab it?
If you have it handy, that would be wonderful. Actually, I don't think we have a chat box to put it in. We can answer someone's question with an unrelated link.
Can I send it to, wait, I'll send it to, Michelle, if I send it to you, can you post it?
Yes.
Okay. I think I just sent it to you. So Alex and I gave an entire hour-long session on just how to do alt text for different platforms, which included social media, which gets into the nitty-gritty details of where you actually find it on the different platforms. It's not right on the main thing. It is there. you'll find it. It's going to be okay. But you do need to put it on, so please do that and follow Alex's handy tips about alt text. And then when we're talking about captioning, this is where it gets a little bit tricky because of course it does. If you are, I had said that you can't do closed captioning for every platform, and this is the area why. So on Facebook, on YouTube, you can upload a separate file, as we talked about the SRT or the SVV or the VTT file. You can upload that. I think Facebook prefers SRT to actually have closed captioning on your video. You can upload it as a separate file. It does not need to be burned into the video. Fine for those two platforms. But when you get to Instagram, it's not a possibility. You cannot upload a separate file as of yet. There are apps that you can use to provide captions, and you can edit with those apps, those captions to put onto an Instagram video. But I will put a little caveat in there. Those apps have not been approved by DOI. I do not suggest, I'm not condoning you download those apps and use them. What I would suggest is actually exporting a different version of the video that has burned on captions. And this has two benefits. The first one being Instagram videos, right? Instagram, either IGTV or Instagram stories or anything like that. The orientation of the screen is different. Some people do the like rotate your screen and then you can watch it. But if you're with a casual viewer and they're going through the pages, they're going to keep scrolling in portrait orientation. So you should be exporting a version of your video in portrait orientation, which takes a little bit of finagling. When I do this for videos that I've shot in landscape orientation, I actually have to cut them and then move the video slowly to where the person is and talking without making anyone seasick to actually get it to work. So keep that in mind if you're trying to do old videos, or you can shrink them in a little bit and have the black bars on the top and bottom. There are ways of getting around it, but you do end up having to export a different version for Instagram if you want to use that platform to the best of its abilities, which means it wouldn't be that hard to turn on the captions for that one and burn in a version that has the captions. The other thing I find is because the screen is portrait orientation, when I put the captions on, I actually want to be able to edit them to make them big enough to read on something like a phone size, and make them fit in that size, right? It's only this big. So I'm going to edit them anyway. I'm going to export a different version and upload it. Maybe in the future, we'll have a DOI approved platform where you can fix the captions and then in the different app and get it all good. But for now, do it the other way. The other benefit for me for captions on, and sorry, not just for me, for people who are not me, there we go, on captions on videos on Instagram or on YouTube is often I'm perusing those platforms when I don't have headphones in or when I'm in a public place, right? Like if I'm waiting in line at the bank, I might be scrolling through Instagram. If there are captions, then I can enjoy your content without having to turn my sound on and piss off everyone around me. If I turn the sound on, I wouldn't actually know what you're saying, so please still do captions. But that's actually an added benefit. That's your universal design concepts coming in. All right, and then the last part of this, the other media that you would put, which I'm going to hurry up on this one, is infographics or text on screen. And the answer to those is both probably not your best platform. Social media is not your best platform for infographics, partially because the alt text field is so small. So if you were to put alt text in, you wouldn't have enough space to actually accurately describe what the infographic is. There are some versions that you can do over on nps.gov, and maybe we can throw a link into where someone did it right, where they have a long alt text field which describes what's actually happening in the infographic. And the second one is don't superimpose text on the image. This is likely personal preference for some people, but the superimposed text is not accessible. It often blocks part of the image, and then you end up having to put that exact same text in the body of the post. Otherwise, it will not show up on search engines, right? Because it's not actually readable text to anyone. So I wouldn't suggest doing that. It usually is not going to reach the audience the way you want it to. I think that's all I have for that. The no-no.
All right. So the very last type of thing we wanted to address briefly, if Christy, you're making a funny faces, is virtual meetings, because this is a really common one in the pandemic for people to be curious about. So if you are doing virtual meetings, whether it's like a public meeting for like a public comment type thing, or whether it is a distance learning program, I think that's another really common one. You'll want to keep some of the different tips in mind that we've talked about so far. So as we have both talked about at different points, you do need captions. And so if your meeting is live, you need to consider how to deploy those. So some video platforms, so for example, GoToWebinar is one that I use the most. You cannot ingest live captions into GoToWebinar. So you have to provide an external link to a different web page where the user can go and can consume those captions. So for something like a meeting or a distance learning program, I think that's perfectly fine, because you're working with people who are explicitly on a computer. They're preparing to join this formal meeting. They have warning ahead of time to set up their either their laptop or their monitor, or ideally monitors, so that they can see the meeting in one screen or one half of their screen and have the captions open on another one. Ideally, though, you're using a platform that does support ingesting live captions. Adobe Connect is one example, and I think we were troubleshooting a little bit with Ben and Michelle, and we think that Zoom is able to do that as well. This is the first time I've ever presented on Zoom, so I can't say it for sure. But the gist is you do need captions. If you're doing a small group event, like with a teacher, I think it's reasonable to reach out ahead of time to the teacher and say, I can provide live captions if you'd like. Would you like me to do that? And the teacher can tell you no or yes. I mean, they can let you know, because it is, there's a cost to doing this, and there's a finite number of quality captioners in the world. So if you're working with a small audience that doesn't desire captioning, save that live captioner for somebody who is working with an audience that genuinely does need it. So that doesn't work for a big public meeting where you don't really have a chance to talk to the audience ahead of time. But for something small like a distance learning program, I think that's perfectly reasonable. Also, don't rely on machine-generated captions. So I had started to type a response to Carrie, because Carrie, I saw your question about Teams, and in fact, I'm just going to hit send on it because I got partway through it. But the gist is, while there are a lot of services that will try to provide live captions via machine, like Facebook Live or Microsoft Teams, don't rely on that yet. There is a possibility that someday machines will know exactly what we say, but in the meantime, there's the chance for errors. And like Christy talked about, you can have errors that have a starkly different issue, or different information that they're conveying than what you actually want to say. So if you're trying to give a safety talk about when not to go in the desert, and the machine keeps missing you because maybe you kind of swallow your knot sometimes, you're going to convey completely different information to some people than what you intended to do. So don't rely on machine captions. Use a human captioner. We are doing that right now. You all work, I think, for the federal government, and that means you can use a service called FedRelay. And so that's my little screenshot on the right, is what the FedRelay website looks like. It lets you input your info. You can input information about your event, and they'll come and they'll provide live captions for it. It does cost money to the federal government. It does not cost money to you. So Carrie, if you were scheduling it for 5 distance learning programs in January, you don't have to pay for it, but the Department of the Interior is going to pay for it. So don't overuse it. If you don't need it, you know, maybe you're doing a call with one person, you can be like, should we schedule live captions or not? And if they say no, then, you know, don't take up somebody's valuable captioning time. But it does exist, and you can use it if you work for the federal government for your internal and external needs. Descriptions. If you can be descriptive, try to do so. I hope that Christy and I modeled that a little bit by kind of describing the different images. It was kind of easy for some of them, since we literally were trying to describe them, to talk about what descriptions are like. So try to describe things as you go. Try not to just dump all your text on one slide, of course. That's just a standard meeting practice. Try to share your presentation materials before or after the meeting. So if it's a virtual learning program, definitely share your presentation materials ahead of time. That can help the teacher identify any complex topics. Maybe they do have some students who have cognitive disabilities, and they want to be able to work one-on-one ahead of time with those students to explain what they're going to see or what they're going to learn during the course of your virtual learning program. Or otherwise, just try to find a way to publish your meeting, after your meeting, try to publish your slide deck, whether that's as a recording or whether you can publish the actual PowerPoint in this example. And we can work with Michelle. I'm sure that we can email this out to everybody or publish it on the digital community site or something like that, if Indiana University doesn't have an easy place for us to upload it. And then finally, consider American Sign Language. It is definitely great if you can offer a little, window like you've got Christy and I here with someone signing. That is not required by the law. So captions, live captions are literally required by the law. You must do that. American Sign Language is a great value added thing. So if you can do it, do it. But if you have to pick between the two because your money's tight, live captions are the one that you must do as far as the law is concerned. And Christy might have more to say about it. Yeah.
I do. ASL would be required if someone has asked for it, meaning like as a reasonable accommodation, I need American Sign Language. You cannot deny me American Sign Language interpreter. That's the difference, right? So yeah, you can't just say, well, no, I provided captions, because captions are English and American Sign Language is a completely different language. So yeah, there is some distinction there, but in general, yes, please use captions. And that if someone needs an ASL interpreter, you can ask to attend the meeting like 2 weeks ahead of time or 3 weeks ahead of time if they do, and then they can contact you if they do.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So those are just some really quick tips on virtual meetings. I will look for a way to share a web page with you where we have a few more tips on the digital community site, or if you just go to inside.nps.gov/digital, you can search around there for tips on virtual meetings as well. Michelle, we have 1 minute left. I'm happy to stick around a little bit beyond time to answer questions if you want, or we can try to just answer people's questions via email after the fact. What do you want to do?
So I wanted to take the opportunity to refer people to the Q&A pod. There are several questions that were answered by your panelists as we were going through the presentation today. For the sake of everyone's time, I do want to do a little bit of a wrap up, but then Alex and Christy, if you are available to stay after, if anybody has any lingering questions, just for a few minutes, that would be great. So for the benefit of everyone, I do want to ask one final wrap up question of both of you, and that is, if you could offer one major piece of advice for striving for digital accessibility across the NPS in 2021, what would it be? Not to put you on the spot or anything.
Alex, do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go first.
Okay. I would say it's that accessibility should be a thought that you have when you're creating the media. It should not be an afterthought. If you're building it into your system as you're doing it, if you're thinking about it from the beginning of when you're starting to create media of, oh, I'm going to need to know how to describe this. Oh, I'm going to need to write a script that includes audio description, best practice, or I'm going to need to leave room in my script to have audio description, or, oh, I'm going to need to provide captions for this. Like if you're building that into your planning process, because it should be built in there, then that's a part of your system. You're not getting to the end and going, oh no, I never left any room for audio description. Now I have to recut a version of the video, and the original video is 4 minutes, and now the audio described version is 8 minutes. I ran into that. Like if you're putting that in, then you're gonna have a better product in the end, and you're gonna not be so stressed.
That is a good tip. You stole the one that I had initially thought of. I didn't actually, I'm just blaming you. I think if I had to leave you with one thought, it would be that the work that you do can make someone's life better. This is a hard time for everybody. People are stuck at home. People who have disabilities, it's not uncommon for them to feel isolated from society already. And if we start publishing content left and right they can't partake in, I think you have the potential to do genuine harm to somebody. But with a little bit of effort, like Christy said, think about it ahead of time, think about your obligations, both legal and, in my opinion, moral. I think that you can make somebody smile. You can make somebody's life better. And so I think that's why you should care about it.
That's great. Thank you both so much. Just as a wrap up to everyone, thank you for attending today's webinar, and thank you especially to Christy and Alex. I will ask if Alex and Christy, you are able to stay on and just respond to some things in the Q&A pod. I'll go ahead and make sure that everyone else feels free to jump off if you need to and go about your day. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I don't mind staying. Christy, I shouldn't have spoken for you too. Do you have a little bit of free time?
I do whatever you tell me to do, Alex. I'm on. We're good.
Well, if we start at the top, Jessica, I'm sorry that we didn't answer Jessica asked a question 40 minutes ago and has probably very patiently been waiting for a response. Jessica writes, for a small park that doesn't have a dedicated visual information specialist, are there any companies the NPS has worked with to create captioning and audio description? There are a lot out there. There are a ton. If you just Google, caption providers, audio description providers, you're going to find a whole bunch. I don't want to recommend any one or two. I would say prices can vary hugely. I worked with the Amtrak program and Jim McCulka, and he was sort of soliciting some bids for some audio description work. And we're talking like one company wanted, I think, $1,200 for the work, and another company was willing to do it for like $250. So get multiple quotes for your work, and you will probably find some people who are either unscrupulous, or maybe they're just still working off of prices from 2005 when this was less common and it was more expensive. But prices go down because there's more people providing it, because there's more realization in the government that this is necessary. And that's how the law's supposed to work, right? Is we all have to do it. There's some pain, there's some growing at the beginning, and then industry is available to help out with it. So definitely solicit multiple bids from a variety of people, or email somebody. Say you're doing market research, you want to find out how much it costs to get 10 3-minute long videos audio described, and you're going to get pretty different answers probably.
You also may be getting different types of services. Like we had someone who tried to send in a video to get audio described from one company, and because they didn't leave space in the track, the company came back and said all they could audio describe is where there were spaces, and there were only two, one at the beginning and one at the end. So that's a very different product than saying, no, audio description is required, so if there are not spaces, we will need to build them in. I think you can also go, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure you can go through a GPO contract through the government printing office. You can send in an SF1 for captioning service or for audio description, and they will find the company to do it, and you can give them the specifications. But I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right, but I might be wrong.
It's a good thought. They definitely can be used for documents. So
yeah.
That's a really good point. Expanded, sometimes companies will call that expanded description, where they will actually modify your video for you to create those pauses that are required just because of the nature of the video. So definitely get the details of what you're buying before you pull the trigger. Don't just be like, oh, somebody is going to charge me $200 and then find out that all they did was describe the first 5 seconds of your 2-minute long video or whatever. Next one, Ranger Megan, sorry that we didn't answer this. I know you asked it a couple times, or maybe I did drop a note in. Are webcams considered 508 compliant? So I am not a lawyer. I may be mistaken, but I have tried to read the standards in full of Section 508, and synchronized live media and synchronized pre-recorded media are called out for different standards of what's required. Synchronized pre-recorded media needs to have an audio description track, but non-synchronized video only media, I don't think is called out in the standards, which is probably an oversight. But I think the best practice for a webcam, because you can't have a narrator just describing your webcam 24/7. I think your best practice is describe the scene in general, describe different things that might occur if you really feel like that's important. But ultimately, a webcam is substantially different than like a live program where you're going out of your way to present some information on Facebook Live or to a class or whatever. And if I'm wrong, I apologize, but that's my understanding of the standards for webcams. The next one, M. Striegel, we had a little bit of back and forth. I hope that you've got what you need. It sounds like your videos are more recent than 1998, so they need to be audio described. That is going to be a labor of love. But, I think there's an interesting lawsuit that happened a couple of years ago where there have been a lot more lawsuits related to digital accessibility in the past 5 or so years than there were in the 20 years prior, more than that, really. A lot of courts, as long as you show that you're acting in good faith to fix your problems, which you may have just inherited, it may not actually be your own fault that you have all these videos that are inaccessible. If you've got a plan, I think a lot of courts are pretty lenient. So I think you start to minimize your legal risk by developing a plan and pursuing it, even if it means you've got a 2-year plan, a 5-year plan to get all of your 1,000 videos audio described. It shows that you're trying, and I think that goes a long way in most courts. So hopefully just by sitting down, developing a plan and working at it, even if it is a long-term plan, that's going to provide you at least a little bit of shelter for the sins of people who may have come before you and did not know that they needed to audio describe those videos. But again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know for sure if that would work. Laura, do you have any resources or training for accessibility in cartography? No, I don't. On the digital community site, I have some thoughts on how to audio describe complex visual media or static complex visuals like a map or an infographic. And so if you go to inside.nps.gov, I will put the address. Ooh, I can put the address into the inside.nps.gov/digital. And you go to that site and search around for accessibility info. There are some tips, which I have largely stolen from something called the Unidescription Project, which is a group with the University of Hawaii that has the bold ambition to describe the world for people who are blind or who have low vision. But the gist is to think about what information is being conveyed, start big picture, and then if you have to write 5,000 words, you can, but start big picture so somebody with a screen reader gets the initial like first blush of what it is. Okay, it's a map. What's that map show? It's Denali National Park. Okay, and then start to get more and more detailed and specific, and they can check out if they want. They might be like, all right, the map, I don't care about this. But ultimately, you are trying to convey in words what something is showing visually, and that can take a lot of words sometimes if it's really complex visual information. Christy, any other tips you have on cartography?
No, zero. Sorry.
No, none, zero. That's fine. M. Striegel, how long does it take to get a contract in place? I have never written a contract in my life. I don't know if Christy has any more tips on what kind of timeline might be involved.
I don't know. I know this is like, I don't know how common of information this is. There are people within the Park Service who are visual information specialists, which is what Alex and I do, whose time can be contracted out internally in order to do this. So recently I did that for Olmsted Center. They contracted out for me to do 3 of their videos, and they paid for my time with project funds in order to do that. But I don't know how long that takes. Sorry,
yeah,
we're not
sorry,
very helpful on that, I suppose.
we're not very helpful on that one, sorry. David, can you explain synchronized pre-recorded media again? Sure, so synchronized means that there's video and audio. So it's not just a podcast, it's not just a video feed like a webcam or whatever. Synchronized means there's video and audio, those two things are meshed together. Pre-recorded means that you created ahead of time, it's not a live program. So synchronized pre-recorded media is ideally the main way that you're producing videos, because that gives you more time to be thoughtful about scripting it, about doing the captions well, about doing the audio description well, about just having a concise, meaningful message and making sure you're not umming and ahhing your way through a live program. And it probably has more longevity because you can publish it in a variety of places. People can stumble across it over time. It doesn't have to just be, this thing happened on December 1st at 9 a.m. and if like Facebook Live, you do a program at 9 a.m. on December 1st, December 2nd, somebody go watch that. It has no life after that. And so synchronized pre-recorded media is mine, and I'll speak, I shouldn't speak for Christy. I think that it's the way to go, Christy.
Yes.
Yes.
I totally agree. So I totally agree.
Yeah.
Do you want me to take the next question?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the statement is, we haven't had great experiences with Fed Relay in our efforts. Captions were not any better than MS Teams live captions. So your captioner is only as good as the information that they have. So you can actually, if you have an agenda for the meeting with the names of the people and the jargon that will be used, you can send that to your captioner before the meeting. Like when you book the captioner, you get an email saying that your captioner is booked. You can respond to that email with that information, which will make your captioner significantly better. The other thing to keep in mind is that the captioner is significantly better at punctuation than live captions are, putting it in the correct place. And they can correct when they figure out that they've made a mistake. So if you have the caption window open and you're someone who is watching the captions and you don't need them as your sole source of communication, you could be watching it and you can message the captioner and say, hey, actually the word they're using is Wrangell St. Elias, right? Which is not something that a captioner is going to know how to type necessarily on the first bat. So you can benefit the people using captioners and get better captions if you preload the human person who is captioning for you. That option is not available with a live computer generated captions. So it may not seem like a big difference, but to someone who needs to use that as a form of communication, it is a huge difference to have it be a human person than it to be computer generated. So please continue to use Bed Relay. And Ellen, even if it doesn't, I mean, hopefully it will help, right? Like fingers crossed it will help. It may depend on which captioner you get, but you still need to use the live captioner over the auto generated.
And one other thought that just occurs to me, which may not be applicable here, Ellen, but definitely check your audio setup, because both machines and humans are going to have a hard time if the audio quality is a little bit fuzzy, or if you have hardwood floors and you're using like a headset like mine. I don't know if you can see it. That can be really echoey. And so see if you can get a microphone that comes out in front of your face, maybe. Make sure that you're in a room that's got lots of fabrics so that it helps dampen the sound. And that might help both the humans, and then if you are using any kind of machine captioning at some point, that might go a long way as well. It's really easy to forget just how weird our houses can be and how the noises can be very strange for participants at the other end.
Yeah, and I found that in captioning or in trying to edit the Friday podcast series, you had to make this list to get longer and longer of the things you couldn't do. And it was like, you had to hold, when we were recording on phones, you had to hold the phone within a foot of your face to get the best audio. You couldn't like bang on the table. You couldn't be clicking a pen. At one point I had to add to the list, you could not wear bangles on your arm, because one lady that recorded, like, I didn't know what was happening, but every so often it'd be like her arms were going up and the bangles were all dangling. So yeah, sometimes improving your audio quality will totally improve the experience for everyone involved. And making everybody else mute when they're not talking. If people are not muted, it will pick up random noises, which makes it much harder for the captioner to hear, makes it much harder for everybody else to hear. So that, like, please mute your mic, huge deal.
Excellent tips. Kelly, should I define scientific jargon used within audio description? Yeah, if you have to use the jargon in the first place, it'll be good to kind of explain it. Like maybe you've got a biologist doing radio telemetry, so they're kind of holding one of those little antenna things up in the air. Your description, you know, it's tempting to just say biologist in Park Service uniform doing radio telemetry. But you might want to explain what radio telemetry looks like. You don't have to like talk about how it works, right? Because hopefully biologist is doing that as the primary narration in the track. But you do want to describe what that looks like. So you might say that they're holding up an antenna of some kind or piece of metal, or I don't know how radio telemetry works. But yes, you do want to try to avoid jargon if you can. And if you have to use it, try to make sure you're explaining what that looks like.
And it should be, if it's something that is scientific jargon, it's likely that it would benefit everyone, not just the audio description. So it's something that maybe should be written directly into the script or into the person talking, right, who's using it and explaining how it's used. And then you need less on the audio description side. That makes it easier for everybody.
Yeah, the more you can put that on your primary narrative track, primary audio track, the less sort of audio description work you have to do, which is always nice. And then the last comment, it's kind of more of a comment than a question. Ellen mentions, I believe the NPS still can't host Adobe Connect sessions. It might not be an approved software package. We can attend a session but not host. That is certainly possible. I am not an IT expert in addition to not being a lawyer. For a while, that was the case with Zoom too. We could join, which is what we've done here. Indiana University is hosting it, not us. So it's possible that you might find that to be the case. So always check with your IT people to see what's legitimate to do in terms of software that you can use. So it's a good point.
We did it.
We did it. Hey, 70 people hung out with us for that. That was nice. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody. Anything else, Michelle?
I don't think so. I believe we are all dismissed, and I will get working on recording and compiling the Q&A as a downloadable resource for everybody. So thanks again. And Alex and Christy, I'll see you again tomorrow.
Sounds good.
Tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye-bye.